So, toward the end of the Middle Ages, the Renaissance started to take off and knowledge started to spread throughout Europe, which became known as the Renaissance. So, at the end of the Middle Ages, the Black Death, starvation, warfare had pretty much taken over Europe and decreased the population, which allowed for farmers to produce more food. With the production of more food, people became happier, and there was also opportunities for people to do other things. Italy, in particular, was divided into a bunch of smaller little city-states like Florence, Milan, Venice, and then the papal states in the south. Nobles sought to display their wealth through the arts. This was by buying paintings, sculptures, and building amazing buildings. So as the economy and the social structure changed, new ideas started to appear. So the Renaissance, which is known as rebirth, began in Italy and was a period of what was known as renewed interest in art, literature, science, and learning. It was a rebirth of this classical era ideas of focusing on science and getting to the root causes of things. So the Renaissance mostly was caused by increased trade with Asia and other regions as a result of the Crusades. In particular, Islamic influences came from the Crusades. There was also the growth of wealthy city-states in Italy, because as the farming increased, they were able to have more wealth overall. There was also a renewed interest in classical learning, and again, the Muslims had been predominantly the ones who had saved those classical learnings, and as those classical pieces of literature came from the Muslims to Europe, there began the Renaissance as well. There was also people who were buying art, and that encouraged art to increase as well. Also, there was increased desire for this scientific knowledge and desire to beautify cities. The Renaissance teaching emphasized the idea of humanism, or the idea that humans had achievement and the focus was on human nature. They argued that individual achievement in education is fully expressed by people using their own talents and abilities. The church no longer served as the main source of stability, and people started focusing in on secular thought, or this focus on what's here on earth rather than the heavens above. When scholars in the Middle Ages had questioned about the natural world, they traditionally went to the church, who said that the world, the earth, was the center of the universe and that everything revolved around that. Because their idea was that the earth and humans are the center of God's universe. But following the Crusades, a lot of the new scientific developments came from the Middle East, and they started testing the theories about this. They come up with a scientific method in where they start to identify a problem, form hypotheses, run experiments, and then eventually come to a conclusion based on those experiments. Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton were very famous during the Renaissance for their scientific discoveries. Copernicus came to the conclusion that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the solar system, which led to the heliocentric theory, that the earth revolves around the sun. And he was also the first scientist to create a model of the solar system. Galileo supported his theory by building the first telescope to try to investigate what was actually in space. And then Newton also kind of changed the world of science by combining all of the different things to talk about gravity. European doctors during the Middle Ages pretty much had thought that everything in the human body was about the zodiac, or religion, etc. But Vesalius, who was a Renaissance scientist, began dissecting human bodies of criminals in order to find out more about what their body looked like. So on the right, you can see a picture of how he was labeling different parts of the body to examine the different muscles. Based on the magnifying glass, we also started to learn about microscopic levels of cells and also particles and atoms and molecules. Unlike the medieval artists that used art to symbolize religion, Renaissance artists were really particular about observing things in their natural space. They wanted to create natural, realistic paintings that looked just like the actual thing. They studied perspective, or how close or how far away things were, and they also started to represent three-dimensional spaces in 2D art. A lot of artists like Michelangelo and Da Vinci focused in on human beings as their main subject matter. Architecturally, they began to incorporate domes, arches, things that went back to that classical knowledge of Greece and Rome. Columns were also extremely popular during this time period. The main family that was supporting this was the Medici family in Florence that gave large sums of money. Some northern philosophers had started to combine these Christian ideas with humanism because in Europe in particular, Christianity was still one of the largest growing areas. Sir Thomas More criticized the English government and started talking about the perfect society based on reason. Meanwhile, William Shakespeare was writing humanistic plays based on human nature to help the uneducated understand the Renaissance ideas. And the other artists, like Albrecht, used the same Renaissance techniques of realism in his oil paintings. There was a couple different things that helped the Renaissance spread. Trade was one of those things. As people began to move, cultural diffusion happened. Scholars and artists also started to migrate to other places, and the printing press in particular helped Renaissance spread northward. As the printing press was invented, letters of the alphabet could be printed on metal plates and allowed them to be make copies of books and whatnot much quicker. The first book ever printed was the Bible, which helped to fuel the Protestant Reformation and allowed for these Renaissance ideas to travel more quickly.